Hey everyone, Daniel Rubino here from Windows Central, and we're doing a special interview today talking about the Dell XPS 13 Plus and a little bit about the whole XPS lineup, in fact. And so we have two people from Dell here, Nick DiLoretto, who's the Director of Industrial Design for the XPS, Alienware, and G Series. So he's going to be the person who's going to really talk about all that radical new look that's part of the XPS 13 Plus, which I did get my hands on this week, and the review will be coming pretty soon, actually. I'm almost done with it. And we'll also be joined with Randall Heaton, who's the product launch manager for the XPS 13, the whole series, because as you may know, there are actually quite a few XPS 13s now. There's a 2-in-1, there's the regular XPS 13, and then now there's the XPS 13 Plus. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those differences there and about that lineup as well. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We love having these discussions with you guys because it gives us an opportunity to kind of go deep into these products, talk about, why the decisions were made and the process that goes into the designing this stuff. And I just want to start off by giving kind of a little history with the Dell XPS line. Well, I mean, I'll let actually Nick give the full history and maybe Randall as well. But, the XPS line has always been the premier premium lineup for Dell's laptops. The XPS 13 really, I would say, broke waves when it went to that Infinity Edge display. That's where everybody took a step back and said, wow, these guys are really doing something different at this point. And since then, it's always been ranked as one of the best laptops around year after year, and it's gotten better. There was some interesting challenges at first, like with the webcam, which was later fixed, and Windows Hello and things added in as the product evolved. And it's been kind of interesting to follow Dell because, as Nick and I were talking about before we started here, like the XPS 13 line tends to be pretty conservative in the fact that they come out with a design, it just blows everybody away, and then you guys keep it for a couple of years with refinements here and there based on customer feedback and production and everything, what's new as far as technology. And this is a little bit different than some other companies. I'm thinking of HP here, who tends to radically alter some of their laptops generation to generation, even though it doesn't necessarily feel like the changes are always needed. And I feel like this was Nokia was doing this too back with the Lumia days, where I felt it was unnecessary almost that they kept changing products year after year when they had like really good designs that they should have just iterated on. So I guess, Nick, we'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about that process and sort of Dell's philosophy when it comes to the XPS 13 line, about how you guys design things, and then we can get deeper into the actual XPS 13 Plus.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, this idea that why change in design. And with XPS, we've always taken the position that we'll only change if there's a tangible benefit to our customers. So you look at that XPS 13 shape, which hasn't changed in a while, and you start to look at, well, why is it that shape? Why does it have the angle on the front? Why is there that angle on the back? And all of these things serve an actual customer purpose, right? The angle on the front helps you open the product, and then the angle on the back allows the A cover to not touch the table when you open the product, so we can put lower feet on it, gets the product closer to the ground for a little bit better user experience. And then the wedge shape allows you to pick the product up off the table. So those things, there was no reason to change. Those are still working really well in terms of benefits to the customer. Where you notice the radical changes, you put it this time, was in the user interfaces. In XPS, we're always looking to expand what users can do, and also looking to simplify generation over generation. So you can see that in this generation. We got rid of the what we call the lattice, or the little lattice between the keys. We got rid of the party line for the touchpad. We obviously went from a physical keys for the function row to capacitive function rows. All these things were done deliberately, intentionally, and they had different goals that spoke specifically to the target customer. With this generation of XPS products, we were looking to bring in a more youthful audience. We saw them as the future of the premium market. So we looked specifically at the things that they were trying to do. We noticed that a lot of them were content creators. We knew it was going to be important to provide more power in this particular product. So that led to the change from the physical function row keys to the capacitive ones, all part of a strategy to almost double the power on this XPS 13 to 28 watts from 15 in the last one. And then that maniacal attention to detail and further simplicity was seen on that keyboard. As I mentioned, we got rid of the lattice that provided more visual simplicity. And then we paired that with the new touchpad where we got rid of the lines around the touchpad. What we realized is that navigating is a very tactile experience. It's not one that you necessarily, it's not a visual one. So having visual delineation for the touchpad wasn't that important, especially we're at a touchpad that's of such a size now where you just simply move your fingers to the center of the product and you can go have that great navigation experience. All of these things led to a more simple product. And when we were talking to this younger generation, they said that they wanted something that allowed them to just focus. So that visual simplicity was part of giving them a product where they have a great screen image and there's very little distraction from that.
So you brought up some really good points regarding probably what are the most controversial aspects of this laptop, which is the keyboard, the trackpad, and those function keys. And we'll start with the keyboard first, especially because I've been using this laptop for the last week, and people immediately look at that keyboard and the trackpad and they think that's going to be unusable. That's going to be really problematic to use. And I was like, even before I got to use, I was telling people, I'm like, well, Dell did research on this. It's not like they just designed it in one version and just gave it to people and said, oh, we'll take the risk and see what happens. And I know you guys actually did try, a few different versions. Maybe you can talk about that after this. But I will say that in using this laptop, I had zero issue with the keyboard and the trackpad. I don't think people realize, especially the trackpad, you mentioned how big it is, but just how much muscle memory comes into using a trackpad. Like when you put your hands on the keyboard and your thumbs just line up there in the center, it's right there where the trackpad is. Same if you're going to use your index finger. I never had any like, oh, I'm off the trackpad and it's not working. And the keyboard isn't just usable. It's one of the best keyboards I've actually used on a laptop. And again, I don't think people appreciate the keys look very flat with no gaps between them, but they're not actually flat. There's little divots on them. So your fingers can actually feel where they're going, but in the travel is still there too. And I just thought using this as a laptop to write and do work on, I had not only no problems, but it was thoroughly enjoyable. And for those who don't know, the trackpad is haptic. And if you listen to this podcast, I have very strong feelings on haptic trackpads. I think they're the future, and I'm, glad to see them here. This is a different type of haptic, though. We've seen the Sensel one is used in the Surface Laptop Studio, and it was also Sensel used in Lenovo's ThinkPad Titanium X1 Yoga. This is a different company and collaboration I believe you guys are doing with this one. Can you talk a little bit about that trackpad and the choices behind it and feedback you guys have been getting?
Sure. Yeah. So the trackpad is a little bit different in its technology. It uses 10 piezo-based haptic motors to provide very sort of accurate haptic feedback and very localized haptic feedback. A lot of other solutions use a larger LRA motor, and that's just one motor, and it vibrates anytime you hit anywhere on a trackpad. Obviously, that feedback can't be as specific because it's just one motor. This, and also if you're navigating, you'll feel the whole palm rest vibrate if you put your other hand on the touchpad while you're using those types of haptic trackpads. This provides very localized and very specific feedback. As far as the choice to not have any delineation goes, we did look at a number of different models when we went through the process, and through looking at sort of lines, or we looked at light up lines, or we looked at a debossed area. When we go through and we look at the benefit to the customer, it just wasn't there because you don't actually need that to have a great navigation experience.
Yeah, it's funny. Lenovo actually has a new line of laptops out. I believe it's the Z series. and they use haptic trackpads on those. And I remember talking to them, they do delineate the area, and they did the reverse. They did experiment without the border, but they decided to, I guess, go with the more conservative approach and actually put the lines on there, even though, as you mentioned, it's technically not needed. That entire like palm rest area is actually glass, if I'm correct, right?
On our
That's
product?
correct. It's all Gorilla Glass.
It's all Gorilla Glass. Yeah, it feels like, I love the feeling of it. Traditionally on these laptops, you're going to get either a metal deck, or you guys used to use the rubberized and the carbon fiber type layer too. But this feels really premium on there. And so it's nice to know it's Gorilla Glass. Obviously, I don't think you want to ever drop an XPS 13, but that's something to be, I think, long term to think about. But I also like the edging on this laptop done with a little metal frame around it. It looks really nice. Randall, can you talk a little bit about the XPS 13 line and how it's been doing for Dell, and how it's the product line has evolved, and specifically also why are you doing the Plus in addition to the XPS 13? I think some people, especially when the XPS 13 Plus came out, was like, oh, that's a new XPS 13. And we're like, no, no, no. It's like, we think there's going to be another one coming. It's going to be the regular XPS 13, but updated itself with new technology. So can you talk a little bit about that decision and the rationale for that?
Sure. Well, you made the point before several years ago when we brought along the Infinity Edge display, where we had three-sided Infinity Edge with the really thin borders. And then, of course, we had what was colloquially known as the nose cam. The camera was loaded at the bottom. We knew that wasn't the ideal location, but to get that look and to get that thin profile, that was the only place that we could fit it at the time. But we knew longer term, we were going to have solutions to be able to move it up to the top. And so part of this is moving in a direction, taking the technology pieces that are available now, but also looking into the future. We started doing the design for the XPS 13 Plus, I want to say the first concept for 3, maybe even 4 years ago. So we knew long ahead of time we were going to make this change. We had just that one 13-inch product. We'd had some 2-in-1 devices at some point or another as well. But the 2-in-1 devices they were clamshell devices. They were laptops first and foremost, and then they were tablets kind of secondhand. So as we moved forward, we said, okay, what do we want to do? One of the requests we constantly get from customers, and I think this is as much a future-proofing thing as anything else, is they want as much performance as they can get. Now, to get more performance, there's more heat in the box. You typically have to make it a little bit bigger with the technology we currently have. So we thought, okay, do we want to shift this entire line to something a little bit more powerful, or do we kind of keep the focus on the mobility? So at that point, we thought, okay, well, maybe there's more than one product that can be suited here. And so we said, okay, what are kind of the different scenarios that people are using this product for? As someone who wants kind of an everyday carry, make it as light as possible. It has good performance, but not kind of top-end performance by any means, not something you want to do any kind of intensive encoding or encoding on or something like that. But that's kind of our everyday laptop. That's the standard XPS 13. We also wanted to kind of push the envelope a little bit further with performance, and that's where the XPS 13 Plus came in. And the Plus is supposed to imply the greater performance, but it's not just the performance. It's all these additional new interfaces we have: the seamless glass haptic touchpad, the latticeless keyboard, the touch function row at the top. All those pieces go in there together, and those also kind of go into that performance story as well. That touch function row at the top, it's a thinner profile than what we would have done if we would have used mechanical keys there. So we're using that extra space by having that thinner profile to have a more robust thermal solution. So we're able to put a more powerful processor in the box. So really, it's instead of having one solution that fits all in this 13-inch space, let's start dividing it up depending on what customer wants, whether that extra performance, that's future-proofing, maybe just the ID itself that they really like. That's what the XPS 13 Plus is for. Then you've got the standard XPS 13, which is your everyday carry. Great performance. It's a little bit thinner and lighter than this one, but still gives good everyday performance with what we see people are using their notebooks for. And then of course, we have the XPS 13 2-in-1, which is the detachable, so you can use it strictly as a tablet, or it can be a primary everyday laptop for you as well.
Yeah, no, that was a really interesting change. I was actually surprised by that. I actually really like the XPS 13 2-in-1, the clamshell, the original one that you guys had. I thought it was a fantastic design. I remember you guys did a lot of work on that. That had a brand new Intel chipset at the time. It was like the smallest motherboard, one of the smallest motherboards created for a laptop. And you guys switched it up for this time around, which was a big change. And now, as you mentioned, it's a tablet with a keyboard that attaches. I mean, are you guys seeing, I presume, more demand for the tablet type experience versus the flipping around? Because we've seen the 360 design sort of become the default for convertibles, and only a few go down the tablet route. But you guys kind of took a different approach here.
Yeah, well, I think what we found is we've had many different iterations of two-in-ones on the XPS over the years. And ultimately, at one point, we had something called the XPS 11. It was a solid surface keyboard. It was a really good tablet, but people really weren't using it that much for a tablet because it had the solid, but the solid surface keyboard wasn't a great solution either. And so we decided, okay, let's bifurcate this. A lot of times, these devices are heavy on consumption. And so we wanted to make a great consumption device. And if you have the weight of a keyboard on there all the time, then that's not always necessarily a great consumption device. You got to carry that around as well. At the same time, there's more and more performance in these tablet only or tablet focused devices. And so if you want that capability to do kind of the regular productivity, office, Outlook, email, things of that nature, then that attachable keyboard is a great solution. So depending on what you're looking for, there is no single solution that is great for everybody. And so what we're trying to do, especially on a 13-inch space, is have a full spectrum, something that is as mobile as possible with a detachable two-in-one, all the way to this high-performance XPS 13 Plus. And in the middle, we've got kind of your standard traditional XPS 13 laptop as well.
Nice. Nick, I have a question regarding the display on the XPS 13 Plus. It's a fantastic display. I have the, I guess it's the UHD Plus, or I don't know. No, I don't have the UHD Plus one. I have the one that's below that. You guys actually have three types of displays, I believe, for that. But one thing that it was interesting that's kind of missing is it's only a 60 hertz display, where we're seeing a lot of companies do 90 and 120. I'm wondering was the decision behind there? Was there just not demand, or is the technology just not there yet, or was it concerns over battery life, since those do use much more power?
Yeah, I'll let Randall go ahead and take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest single factor there is the battery life. That extra capability of the higher frequency, it is useful in some applications, absolutely. We are seeing more and more demand, but it does take more battery life. And these are our most mobile devices. They're 13-inch products on the XPS side. So I wouldn't be surprised that sometime in the future we added that capability, or maybe variable refresh rates. There's a lot of technology in there that actually will slow down the refresh rate in certain situations to save power. And since these are primarily mobile first products, I think that was our biggest concern. Now, if you look over to our Alienware or gaming side, absolutely we will enable that. There's some very direct performance benefits that are very relevant today. I think it's a great place there. But for XPS, I don't think we're quite ready for that. As the technology advances and there are more efficiencies in how that extra refresh rate is applied, I think we'll probably see it come into more mainstream notebooks and probably the XPS line as well at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think it's something we're all kind of waiting for, which is right now, as you mentioned, the displays default to 60, and then they can ramp up to 90 or 120. This is a feature now built into Windows 11, and as long as the drivers work and everything like that, it helps. But the better solution, which I haven't seen yet, is ones that drop below 60 hertz. So if you're looking at a static image or a simple web page, the refresh will be much lower. And hopefully we'll see those in the next couple of years. But I think that would be the really kind of nice game changer for this technology, because as much as I love the 90, 120 hertz and it looks great, specifically 120, almost 90 hertz, I'm not sure it's even worth it because of the changes as much. But 120, you really start to notice it a little bit more. But it definitely impacts battery life. And I know at least on the XPS 13 Plus, you guys have, between that processor and the battery and just the size of the device, because you mentioned it's a plus, but it's not really bigger than the XPS 13. It's not like a larger device. And for those who aren't aware, the XPS 13 Plus is running the Intel 12th Gen P series processors, whereas the XPS 13 is running the U series. And to put those in perspective, The XPS 13U series, I fully expect that chip to be faster than last year's 11th Gen U series, mostly because of the more cores you're going to get. And then the P series, and this is the important thing. I don't think people appreciate how powerful the P series is now. It will easily beat an 11th Gen H series, what used to be the 45-watt chips in terms of performance, mostly because you're getting so many more cores with these chips. And it's really a huge step up in that performance, which I think is really impressive. The difference being, of course, most H series laptops have a dedicated discrete GPU, and you're not getting that here. Instead, you're using Iris Xe. Who's the person to talk to about thermals? Because I know thermals, Randall, you touch upon this quite a bit, but this was really important regarding the function keys. You mentioned that already. Some people thought you're doing that just to be cool, like, oh, look, they look nice. And they do, they look super futuristic. But people are like, oh, Apple tried that, it didn't work, but Apple did it because they actually thought it was going to be cool, where you guys are doing it because they were thermal constraints and it gave you that extra space. I was wondering if you could talk about the challenges there. Like I said, this laptop isn't bigger than a traditional 13. In fact, it's extremely tiny.
Yeah, the difference between the 13 and 13 Plus as far as thickness is just a couple millimeters, so it's not a huge difference. But you carry that around every day. It's a couple tenths of a pound difference there as well. You'll notice that, maybe not just real casually, but over time it's there. And so, that was really kind of what our goal. We didn't want to beef this 13-inch product up so it looked like a gaming box very thick. We wanted to still keep it thin. And so we had some goals as far as how thick it could go. At the same time, you're right, we put this P series processor in there, which is a 28-watt processor, and we needed to make sure we could run it at full performance. And so we said, okay, what are the different things that we can shrink? We looked at shrinking the travel of the keyboard. We tried that. We didn't really like the way that the keyboard feels as good. That threshold, we actually have 1 millimeter of travel, which is pretty standard across the board. There are some keyboards, especially on the commercial side, that have more travel than that, but anything less than about 1 millimeter of travel, people really start noticing there's a difference. And so we didn't want to lose that. So we looked at other options. We don't have a ton of ports on the box because the ports also take some space in the side as well. Also, we have vents on the back, and depending on where we set the hinges, you either narrow that space that the vents have, or we can widen it up. And that's one of the reasons we have less ports on here. We wanted to kick those hinges on the back as wide as possible, so we have much venting in the back as possible. And that's where the venting is. So that's where we really need that space. And so we used the shrinkage of the kind of the height of where those touch function row is by going to this just a touch row instead of a mechanical solution. And that's mainly taken up by some thermal fins that use to help push the heat out of the box on the back there. So a lot of that venting is going to the back, and we're making the maximum use of that space right there to make it happen.
Nice. Yeah. For those listening, you may not know that the XPS 13 Plus only has 2 Type-C Thunderbolt ports, one on each side, and no headphone jack. But you guys did include in the box the adapter for Type-C to a headphone jack and an adapter for Type-A, which is nice because I know that was like up in the air when I was first briefed on this product. It was like, yeah, we think we're going to be putting in there, but we're not sure. But I can say in the box, you do get both of those adapters, which goes a long way. Personally, I haven't used wired headphones on a laptop in many years, but I know that's still a controversial thing, which is but it was one of those necessary moves, I think, as you mentioned on this laptop. It did give you that extra space. Nick, going back to design, you mentioned that some of this started back in 2018 for the XPS 13 Plus. Can you just walk us through that process of like how you guys even start off about like what you're going to do and what those changes are going to be, especially because, we said you guys stick with the design for a couple of years. So you have to be a little bit forward looking, knowing what the technology that's kind of coming down the road and you're going to be able to build around so that it's not obsolete. So I don't know, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, all of our designs start with a customer, right? So we did redefine the whole new target with this product. We wanted to target this young metropolitan customer, started looking at what they wanted to do and the experiences that they wanted to have. And that kind of led us to some of these answers that we wanted to pursue. And there were some bigger goals that we had as well, right? Every time we go through and redo these products, there's constant refinement that happens. We wanted to make the products more sustainable than they were in the last generation. So when you look at the last XPS 13 Plus or last XPS 13 versus the new XPS 13 Plus, you'll notice that simplification. We have no polished diamond sidewall on this new generation. Instead, it's one consistent bead blast finish. So we reduced finishes, but we elevated the finish that remains. If you feel the two next to each other, this one's much smoother in the way it feels. But by getting rid of that second anodized step, it allowed us to boost yield rates, which means that we have less waste. It's better for the environment. We're also using low carbon aluminum in these products, which means that the carbon's sourced from sources that use renewable energy like hydropower. So there were some big goals that weren't technology related that we also brought into this. There was other things that we wanted to do, other small changes. You mentioned the Gorilla Glass on the touchpad and the capacitive function row. We worked to make that even smoother than it was in the previous generation. There's a lot of small things that kind of add up to this overall, what we call this tactile journey and experience of the product that we wanted to get right. Other things like the keyboard, that was something that took us a while as well. When we got rid of the lattice, we wanted to be really sure that we were still providing an excellent typing experience for our customers. And that took quite a bit of exploration. We made a lot of different 3D prints, playing with the key pitch or the distance between the keys, and then looking at keyboard dish as well, something else that you mentioned earlier. All of these things kind of came together to create the right experience. At the end of the day, we ended up building 3 different working keyboards, and it's not easier to build a prototype keyboard. The same amount of engineering as a production keyboard has to go into each individual keyboard prototype that you build. So that took quite a bit of work to go do. And at the end of the day, we ended up with a keyboard that, like Randall said, has the same amount of travel as the previous generation, but we enlarged the keycaps so you have a bigger striking surface. We tried a few different dishes or concavities in each key till we got the right thing. Ultimately, what we found is that when we removed the lattice between the keys, we had to add slightly more dish so that your fingers could find a home. So on the XPS 13, the dish on those keys is 0.1 millimeters. On these keys, it's 0.3 millimeters. It's a subtle change, but it makes a big difference. All of these things were highly considered. And it got us to a result where even though the interface looks radically different, as you mentioned, when you go and use it, it doesn't behave radically different. It still feels like a really great laptop input experience.
Yeah, I really like that keyboard. I think it looks really fantastic. And you guys just keep, the displays, of course, really nice. Is the display Sharp IGZO, or are you using OLED now on these?
So we're using both, actually. So we do have an OLED
Okay.
panel, and then we do have, Sharp is one of our suppliers of the panels that we're using as well, and they really do great on their power efficiencies. And so we usually work with Sharp quite for some of our newer panels because they do great from a power efficiency standpoint, as well as the brightness and color gamut, which is really kind of what separates some of the premium panels from kind of the everyday panels. Is how bright can you get it and also have it remain efficient at the same time with good color gamut.
Yeah, the Sharp IGZOs I've always enjoyed because they found in my opinion, a nice balance between OLED and what the LCD IPS displays were at the time. It was somewhere in between. And a lot of that had to do with OLED when it first came out. It was too intense, and it was like, it looked amazing. The first 30 seconds, you're like, oh my God, it's crazy. But then after an hour, you're like, this is too intense. And I've noticed this generation of OLEDs across manufacturers, a lot more tamed down in terms of the contrast. So you still get those deep blacks and that color punch, but it's not as like intense as your smartphone is, allowing it to be looked at for longer periods of time. For me, eye fatigue is a big deal. You guys did the anti-reflective displays for a long time, which I'm a huge fan of. So I think that's really kind of neat. And I guess we'll go to Nick for this, but I also want Randall's input. What technologies in laptops do you think are sort of the most interesting ones to watch right now or in the future? Is it displays? Is it going to be around the processors? 5G connectivity. You guys have been pretty also conservative of offering always connected PCs. I will say the 2-in-1, I believe, does offer a 5G option, which is kind of nice. That's, I believe, a first for XPS 13. But Nick, do you have like any sort of technologies or materials that you guys are interested in using? I know you guys use some crazy materials for the thermals. I don't know. What are you saying?
As far as materials go, I think in the short term, we are always looking to provide the best materials possible for any given task. In the previous generation, you saw us use carbon fiber and glass fiber. In this generation, we've moved to glass, still using aluminum. Aluminum CNC, I think, will remain one of the better materials to make laptops out of for quite some time. It's got a really great combination of strength and being lightweight. As far as new technologies, I think there's a lot of interesting new screen technologies coming that might allow for some really great interface experiences in the future. Everything from bendable OLEDs, excited about micro LED displays. I think there's some interesting potential in what kind of experiences you can give the customer through some of these.
Nice. And Randall, what are you watching in technology for laptops that has your interest piqued?
So I'd say three things. Definitely the panel. There's a lot of opportunities out there that the panel probably consumes more power than just about anything else, depending on what you're doing with the notebook. And so the efficiencies you can get there are great, especially as you can improve the visual experience. Two other things are very subtle. There's new Wi-Fi standards coming out that, Wi-Fi's been around for so long. What's the big deal? It's pretty fast as it is now, but also interacting with the Bluetooth aspect of it and your ability to connect different devices together more seamlessly. That's going to be really nice from a user experience. And then the last item is probably battery technology. We've been making small gains in battery technology for a long time. Things get a little bit more efficient. We're using more energy dense cells than just about anybody else in the market right now in our XPS products, and they're a little bit more expensive, but they are just kind of small steps forward as far as efficiency. When we get to the point that the energy density is even greater in there, it can make the products lighter. It can give you a lot more flexibility in how you're structuring the product, and also can give you that all-day battery life, which sometimes is hard to achieve depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your notebook.
I guess that leads me to a question that's near and dear to me, which is, when are you guys going to jump on, or will we ever get an XPS laptop that's also ARM powered? We're starting to see, a few more ARM PCs. I'm trying the Snapdragon 8cx Gen 3 right now, and for me, I think it's a game changer in terms of performance. I feel like for the first time, this feels like a normal consumer level product. It feels like an 11th gen Core i5 to me in terms of overall performance. But you guys have been pretty conservative when it comes to adopting that technology. I assume you guys are looking at it, but have decided it's just not there yet. Do you think that that period will be coming up sometime for the XPS line or any other line, or are you guys going to go like enterprise first, do you think?
Well, I say you're right. We are always looking at the technologies, ARM-based and otherwise as well. We're always considering them. I won't comment on anything directly, but we're always having that under consideration. I think some of the gap with the ARM stuff is getting better and better, and so the likelihood is going to increase more and more. Whether that's a year down the road or 10 years down the road, it's probably somewhere in between there at some point.
Got it. Will we ever see an XPS 15 2-in-1 again? I actually still have that laptop, which I know is an interesting experiment. I'm not a huge fan, I think, of 15-inch convertibles or even now 16-inch. They seem to be very much the exception. But obviously, I know some people still ask about that. But presumably the feedback and consumers just didn't want a convertible that size. Would that be accurate?
That's true. I mean, and we'd had some definite big fans of that XPS 15 2-in-1. We had an XPS 18 all-in-one here a few years back that was essentially a large tablet. It had a battery as well. The market acceptance as a whole wasn't great for it, but there were some very diehard fans and customers that love the product. And I think that's what we're kind of trying to balance there. What's the next item right there? We want customers to love our products, and doing something unique usually gives us that opportunity. But we also have to be able to sell enough of them to make it worthwhile. And so we won't see those as often, but I think we continue to want to push the envelope with XPS. on different form factors and different opportunities like that. So we'll continue to look at opportunities like that going forward. But yeah, the two-in-one seemed to be a big push for a two-in-one, but the actual usage of it, especially on those larger screens, people just much preferred to have the clamshells from their wallet perspective, what they were wanting to buy.
Got it. And I also probably have to ask this question since a lot of the hardcore nerds are going to want to know. Intel versus AMD. The XPS line has pretty much always been Intel, although I believe that XPS 15 2-in-1 was had an AMD partnership with Intel. Are you guys, looking at AMD ever in putting as far as using those chips, or are you guys thinking you're going to stick with Intel for the foreseeable future?
So we're always going to choose what we think is the best solution for our customers. AMD does some great stuff right now. Intel does as well. I think AMD has made some great gains against Intel recently, and that always brings the conversation up. We definitely consider whatever we think the best solution is for our customers. To date, with the exception of that XPS 15 2-in-1, which had a combination of an Intel processor and an AMD graphics solution put together on the same silicon chip, that was kind of an interesting thing, and it was really neat what they did there. I think we're going to continue to look at opportunities as they pop up, but no commitment in anything at the moment.
Got it. Nick, any final thoughts you want to share with us on the development of the XPS 13 Plus and expectations for going forward?
Oh, expectations going forward. We're always working on really great things, and we're always looking to push the envelope. XPS exists at Dell to kind of serve as a guide on how to move forward within the computing industry. So XPS will continue on its mission to look at where we can push next. As far as the XPS 13 Plus process goes, I think it was one of the most exciting projects I've been involved in working on the XPS brand. I think we did a lot of new things there that all kind of came together to create a great result. Everything from those interface elements that you mentioned to the things you don't see. Like we were able to get a 4-speaker audio solution in the XPS 13 Plus. That was a first for the XPS 13 Plus. So better audio than we've ever had before. And we also, on the LCD panels, were able to remove the cover glass to get the product to be a little bit lighter. So a lot of really fun things and a lot of different things in that product. And you can expect to see a lot of more innovations out of the next XPS 13 products that we release.
And I don't know who can answer this, maybe Randall. What does XPS stand for?
So I've been at Dell for over 20 years. At one point, XPS was the Extreme Performance System. This is when we were doing desktop. This is like 20 plus years ago that this happened. Then the brand kind of got shelved for a while, and we brought it back. It doesn't have a specific meaning right now. It's not performance, although we make great performance machine. It's just our premium brand. We like the way it looks. We like the way it sounds, and so we kind of kept that and resurrected that brand. It's something that customers 20 years ago, when we first were putting together these desktop FPS systems, they connected with. So we wanted to continue to have something that customers would connect with.
Well, it definitely sounds cool. I have to admit that XPS is just kind of rolls off the tongue, and NetX is always a cool thing to have in any brand name. So, well, at least that's interesting. I'm glad I asked that question. All right, guys. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Randall, for joining us. It was a great conversation about the XPS 13 Plus. We do have the review coming up on Windows Central very soon, so tune into my thoughts for that. As always, tune to our podcast, which it's recorded Fridays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. And thanks to Dell for allowing these two gentlemen to join us. We're very much appreciative of that.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.